traditional Indian philanthropy, which was informal and community-based, with modern organized philanthropy represented by the Gates Buffet model. Traditional philanthropy often focused on local community welfare. Examples like Ford Motors, where Henry Ford famously raised wages so that his workers could afford the cars they were building. The US studies show how racial minorities are overrepresented in prisons. So drawing comparisons with countries with high prison rates and those focusing on social equity can emphasize the link between social justice and prison demographics. Presents the true social justice can only be realized when the root causes of poverty are addressed, making charity a temporary rather than permanent solution. Hello everyone, today we are continuing the series on essay micro theme, and today we are going to dive into a theme that is not only vital for essay preparation but is also central to the soul of our society, that is poverty, social justice and society topics. So this theme encompasses economic disparities, healthcare, education, cultural identity and social ethics, all crucial components that shape our society's foundation. So let us explore these PYQs right here and try to understand the UPSC's perspective and learn how to approach these topics effectively. So if you look at the topic, a society that has more justice is a society that needs less charity, asked in 2023, and the topic, there can be no social justice without economic prosperity. But economic prosperity without social justice is meaningless. So both these questions highlight the interplay between economic growth and social justice. While economic prosperity is a foundation, it is meaningless if it doesn't lead to equitable benefits across all sections of the society. So the statement here suggests that when justice prevails, there's less need for charity as systems are in place to support all members of the society. So when you're tackling these kinds of essays, focus on concepts like inclusive growth, where economic progress uplifts the marginalized groups and reduces the gap between the rich and the poor. Use examples like the Scandinavian countries where economic growth is balanced with social equity that results in a fair and inclusive society. Now contrast this with the instances where economic growth has led to increasing inequality, reinforcing the need of justice in economic policies. So next up, if you look at the topic, neglect of primary healthcare and education in India are reasons for its backwardness. And also the focus on healthcare is increasingly getting skewed towards the haves of our society. So these topics bring to light the systematic issues in India's healthcare and education sectors, which are crucial and critical for social justice. They argue that neglecting these primary sectors has hindered India's progress and increased the divide between the privileged and the underprivileged. In your response, discuss the implications of skewed healthcare system where the elite have better access to the services, leaving the majority without the essential care which is required. You can also mention challenges in primary education, which, when neglected, perpetuate into cycles of poverty and inequality. You could also cite initiatives like the National Health Mission or Right to Education Act, analyzing their impact on bridging these gaps. Now, next up, if you look at the topic, food security for sustainable national development and reservation politics and empowerment here. So food security is essential for sustainable development as it ensures that every citizen has a basic necessity of food, forming the foundation for a healthy, productive society. Similarly, reservation and empowerment highlights the need for policies that uplift marginalized communities, balancing the historical inequalities in our country. For these essays, explore how food security impacts national stability and development, touching upon programs like the Public Distribution System and National Food Security Act. With reservation, discuss both the sides of it, like how it empowers the marginalized but also sparks debates on the meritocracy and equality. Link these points to the larger goal of achieving social justice and reducing the poverty here. Now, second up in this section, if we look at the first question, that is, culture is what we are, civilization is what we have. And the other question here, Indian culture today, is it a myth or a reality? And if you look at the next up question also, the modernism and our traditional socio-ethical values, and the composite culture of India. So all these four questions probe deeply into India's cultural identity and the impact of modernity on traditional values. They question whether our cultural roots are intact or if modernism has diluted our identity. To approach these, reflect on India's composite culture, a blend of diverse customs, religions, and language. Explore the tension between preserving traditions and embracing modern values, discussing if this blend enhances our identity or creates an identity crisis. Use examples like yoga, which represents Indian cultural heritage, but also has been modernized and globalized, showing both the preservation and the evolution of cultural values. Now, next up, if we look at the topic, the Indian society at the crossroads, and from traditional Indian philanthropy to the Gates buffet model, a natural progression or a paradigm shift. Next up, new cults and godmen, a threat to traditional religion. So if we look at the next topic, the Indian society at the crossroads. So this topic raises questions about the rise of new age spiritual movements and their potential impact on traditional religions. It is a reflection of changing social dynamics where certain godmen or cults attract followers by promising quick solutions to life's problem. Here you can discuss how these movements sometimes exploit people's faith, contrasting them with the traditional religious practices that emphasize community and selfless service. Mention instances where certain cults have led to controversies impacting the social fabric. This discussion allows for an exploration of faith, spirituality, and ethical issues in the society. Now, next question here, from traditional Indian philanthropy to the Gates buffet model, a natural progress or a paradigm shift. So this question contrasts traditional Indian philanthropy, which was informal and community-based, with modern organized philanthropy represented by the Gates buffet model. Traditional philanthropy often focused on local community welfare, while modern approach is larger scale, more structured, and often linked to the global causes. In your response, explore the benefits of each of these models. Traditional philanthropy was deeply rooted in culture and values, fostering community solidarity. However, if we look at the Gates buffet model, it brings a professional approach. It maximizes impact and addresses complex global challenges. Now, analyze if India's philanthropic mindset has evolved naturally or if it is a shift influenced by Western practices. Now, we will be moving to analyzing some quotes that can be used as future essay topics here. So, if we look at the first question, that is, the rich can't accumulate wealth without the cooperation of the poor. At first glance, it might sound a bit obvious, right? But if we dig a little deeper, there's a lot more to it than just the surface level idea of the rich need the poor to work for them. The topic is really about understanding the relationship between different layers of society and how people with money and resources rely on the larger population, not just to work for them, but to actually drive the whole economy forward. So think about it. For any big business to succeed, they need a workforce to make the products, provide the services, and keep everything running smoothly. And at the same time, they also need to buy those products and services. Without both sides working together, the system just doesn't work. It is like a chain where every link is very important. So this idea isn't just about charity or compassion. It is really about interdependence. So if we look around, whether it is small businesses or big corporations, everyone at the top relies on the foundation that's built by the larger working class. It's a kind of partnership, even if we don't always see it in that way. And when that balance tips too much in one direction, like if wealth gets too concentrated at the top, it can lead to a whole bunch of new problems there. So social tension tends to rise in such a situation, and even the economy can start to feel the strain. So if we look at this topic and break down its key terms into some fundamental question. So first question here would be that how do the rich accumulate wealth? So they do so by businesses, investments, and economic ventures. So the wealthy often accumulate wealth by the businesses and ventures. However, these ventures rely on labor and consumption, which primarily comes from the economically weaker sections of the society. For example, you all can reference the dependency of large corporations on low-wage labor in manufacturing, such as the garment industry or the electronic industry. You can also mention brands that have faced scrutiny for relying on cheap labor overseas. Referencing concepts like trickle-down economics can show an understanding of economic theories that justify or critique wealth accumulation. Adding recent statistics about income inequality from the World Inequality Report to support this argument can be done. And this can add weight to the argument. For instance, if students could note that top 1% owns nearly half of the global wealth, emphasizing the imbalance. Now, the next question here is that what role do poor play in wealth accumulation? So the poor contribute through labor and as consumers, both essential for the economic growth, as we just discussed. So here, including real-world examples from the sectors where low-wage workers are indispensable, like agriculture, retail, and hospitality. So, for example, in the US, the agriculture sector heavily depends on the migrant workers, which highlights the reliance on economically weaker sections. So, adding a quote here, like the wealth of the rich is the result of the work of the poor, could give philosophical depth to the argument here. You can also discuss concepts like that is purchasing power parity and its impact on the economy. They can explain how low-income groups, when empowered with fair wages, can contribute more effectively to boosting economic growth by boosting consumer demand. Now, the other question here is, why is cooperation between the rich and the poor significant? Why is it important? So, economic systems are interdependent, requiring the contribution of all sections for stability. Here you can mention examples like Ford Motors, where Henry Ford famously raised wages so that his workers could afford the cars they were building. This demonstrates the practical benefits of fair compensation. Introducing Rousseau's social contract theory can also help illustrate the concept that society functions on mutual obligations and that stability is achieved when all the groups benefit. You could also mention the Nordic model here, where economic stability is achieved through inclusive policies that balance wealth distribution. They could explain how these policies have resulted in lower inequality and higher social cohesion. Now, moving to the next question. What happens when this cooperation is unequal? So when wealth is unevenly distributed, it leads to social unrest and economic issues. So you could bring in data on wealth inequality and its impact, like citing studies that link high inequality with social issues like crime or poor public health can add credibility to this argument here. So you could also reference movements like the Occupy Wall Street protests or the recent Yellow Vest movement in France that can be used to illustrate the tangible effects of inequality on social stability. Karl Marx can also be mentioned here because of his theory of class struggle, which can show a nuanced understanding of how economic inequality historically leads to social tension. Now, the last question here is that how can the relationship between the rich and the poor be balanced if it is unequal at the moment? So, ensuring fair wages, safe working conditions, and economic policies that promote equity can maintain balance. You could give examples of effective policies such as the minimum wage law or universal basic income experiments in Finland and Canada, explaining how these policies help reduce the wealth gap would be beneficial. You could also include data on progressive taxation's effectiveness in reducing the inequality. For example, you could cite that countries with progressive tax systems have lower income inequality rates. All right, so let us move to the next topic now. So the topic here is access to education and health is not a privilege. It is the basis of achieving social justice. So this statement touches upon one of the most fundamental ideas in building an equitable society. Essentially, it argues that education and health are not extras that some can afford while others cannot. Instead, they are essential pillars that give every individual a fair shot at life, dignity, and equal participation in the society. So, without universal access to these two services, the concept of social justice remains incomplete. Now, if we had to look at the questions here, so the first question that arises from this topic is that why is access to health and education fundamental for social justice? So education and health form the backbone of an individual growth and societal development. They ensure that every person has the opportunity to contribute productively to the society, enhancing both personal and economic growth. Relevant data facts can be mentioned here, showing how nations with high education and healthcare standards tend to have lower inequality and high social mobility. You could also take references of thinkers like Amartya Sen, who argued that true freedom comes from access to resources like education and health, because this argument could add depth. And Sen's capability approach emphasizes that people need certain capabilities to lead fulfilling lives, and access to health and education is critical for that. Then again, The example of Scandinavian countries which provide universal healthcare and free education consistently ranks high on social justice indexes. So that can also be used as an example to further enrich your argument over here. So the next question here is that what happens when education and health are treated as privileges? So when these services are accessible only to the wealthy and privileged, it widens the gap between social classes and creates cycles of poverty and exclusion. It means that only certain groups can develop their potential fully while others are left behind. So adding cases where privatized education and healthcare systems lead to unequal access, such as in the US, where healthcare costs are a major cause of financial insecurity for many, can illustrate this point. You could also include some quotes on education, such as education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. This again can reinforce this idea here. Making these essential services exclusive only damages the society as whole. You can also mention how access to education and healthcare has historically been a powerful tool for breaking the cycle of poverty. For example, rise in literacy programs. Post-independence in India can add depth to your argument here. So the next question here is that how does education contribute to social justice? So education equips individuals with the skills, knowledge and empowerment they need to improve their lives and make meaningful contributions to the society. It also fosters equality by allowing more people to participate in decision making and shaping policies that impact them. So here, economic impact data pointing out how education boosts economic growth. Example, the correlation between the literacy rates and the GDP in developing nations can strengthen this argument. You can also mention how education fosters civic awareness, which encourages active participation in democracy. Higher levels of education often correlate with higher voting rates and civic engagement. So you can also cite examples of individuals from disadvantaged background who have transformed their communities through education can be powerful. Here, example of Malala can be relevant. So her advocacy for girls' education highlights how education can challenge deeply ingrained inequalities. Now, if you look at the next question, that is, how does access to healthcare promote social justice? So access to healthcare allows individuals to live healthier, more productive lives. It reduces disparities and gives everyone a fair chance to thrive regardless of their socio-economic background. Good health is the foundational value to human dignity and social participation. So here you can quote studies that show the health disparities between rich and poor communities, such as difference in life expectancy between wealthier and poor neighborhoods, can make this point compelling. You can also discuss how universal healthcare policies like the National Health Service in UK, NHS in UK, help reduce health inequalities by providing services free at the point of use. And you can also highlight importance of mental health here in achieving social justice. Students can mention how access to mental health services is essential and often limited for lower income communities, which further increases social inequalities. Now, the last question here is, what measures can be taken to guarantee access for all? So, to ensure access to education and healthcare policies should focus on affordability, infrastructure, and awareness. Universal health and education systems, affordable public services, and strong anti-discrimination laws are essential for this. Students can discuss how India's Right to Education Act, which mandates free and compulsory education for children aged 6 to 14, is a step towards universal education, although the challenges in implementation remain. Adding the examples of countries with successful universal healthcare models like Japan or Canada, where healthcare is accessible to all citizens, can support this section. And other than this, you can also include some quotes which is related to equity, right? So let us discuss the next theme here, which is, you cannot lift another soul until you are standing on a higher ground yourself. So the basic idea of this concept is often talked about in the context of personal development and helping others. It means that to truly support and uplift others, one must first attain a certain level of stability, knowledge, or strength. Only then they can effectively assist those who need guidance or support. So if we look at the first question here is that, what does standing on higher ground mean? Here, higher ground refers to a stable, secure, and resilient state, whether it is mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. This is not about superiority, but about being in a position where you can have the capacity to help without compromising your own well-being. So you could use metaphors like being a lighthouse, standing strong and guiding others through difficult times without being swayed by storm themselves. Students can also use the reference of thinkers like Maslow, who emphasize the need for self-actualization and stability before one can genuinely contribute to other person's growth. So if we look at the next question here, it is, why is it important to be on higher ground to help others? So being well prepared and stable enables you to offer genuine and sustainable support without getting overwhelmed. It also allows you to help others without risking burnout or depletion of your own well-being. You could mention how mental health professionals undergo extensive training and self-care routines to ensure they are fit to assist others effectively. So drawing a comparison to the airplane safety rule, put on your oxygen mask before assisting others, can help illustrate the necessity of being in a safe position before helping others. Hence, the higher ground is required. Now, if we look at the next question, how does self-improvement relate to helping others? So, self-improvement strengthens one's capacity to assist by building resilience, understanding, and skills. A person who has developed inner strength is better equipped to support others in a meaningful way. You can talk about how self-improvement activities like meditation, learning, or physical fitness creates a strong foundation for helping others. You could also use quotes here to further enrich your point. Quotes such as, you can't pour from an empty cup. So this idea also reinforces that you must be fulfilled or whole yourself to give effectively. Next question here is that, what are the consequences of trying to help without being on the higher ground. So trying to help others without personal stability may lead to exhaustion, ineffective support, and even unintended harm. It can drain one's energy and impact their ability to continue helping over time. So you can discuss how compassion fatigue affects caregivers and those in helping professions. This illustrates that without self-care, one's capacity to help diminishes. You can mention instances like burnout in social workers or healthcare professionals who do not manage their own well-being, as this could provide a realistic view of the consequences that we have. And the last question is that how can one prepare to help others effectively? So preparation includes focusing on self-care, continuous learning, emotional resilience, and setting boundaries. It also involves building empathy without losing oneself in other person's struggles. So you could also suggest techniques such as mindfulness, journaling, or regular exercise as a method to build strength and resilience. So here you can also discuss the importance of boundaries in helping professionals, how being empathetic yet detached ensures sustainability in providing support. Here you should adopt a growth mindset and continuously improve oneself to stay capable of helping others. Right? So let us move on to the next topic now. Next topic here is, no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. So this topic suggests that the real measure of a society's values, priorities, and approach to justice can often be observed through the conditions within its prison system. So if we have to break down this idea, so the first question that is here is, why are jails a true measure of a nation? So jails are a reflection of how society treats its most vulnerable and marginalized populations. Observing prison conditions can reveal the degree of humanity and respect a nation holds for even those who have committed crimes. You can refer to thinkers like Fyodor, who famously said that the degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. Mentioning specific countries with varying prison conditions like Norway's rehabilitative approach versus the punitive models elsewhere can give students a comparative understanding of how a nation has been treated their prisoners. Now the next question here is, how do jail reveals the values of society? So the treatment of prisoners indicates the level of respect for a human dignity and rights within a nation. Whether the prison system focuses on punishment or rehabilitation speaks volumes about the societal values. A society valuing rehabilitation and reintegration will have humane prison conditions. Students could also discuss rehabilitation-focused models as we just mentioned. You can also include stats of rates in rehabilitative versus punitive prison systems that will be highlighting the effectiveness of humane approaches, right? Now, the next question here is, what do prisons say about social justice and inequality? So prisons often mirror societal disparities. They highlight the systematic biases. It also indicates that how different communities are treated under the law. For instance, marginalized groups are often disproportionately represented in prison populations, pointing towards systematic inequality. Students can also refer to studies that highlight racial or socio-economic disparities in prisons. For example, the US studies show how racial minorities are overrepresented in prisons. So drawing comparisons with countries with high prison rates and those focusing on social equity can emphasize the link between social justice and prison demographics. Right. So the next question here is, how can prison conditions impact a nation's reputation? So a nation with humane prison conditions reflect a commitment to justice and fairness, and this further enhances its global reputation. On the other hand, if the prison has inhumane conditions, this indicates a neglect and societal inequality, often drawing international criticism. Here, reports on how human rights abuses in prisons have affected the reputations of countries, like criticism faced by Russia or certain Middle Eastern countries for prison conditions, can be mentioned to further enrich your point. Referencing data from Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch can lend credibility to the point about global perception and reputation. So the last question here is, how can nations improve their prison systems to reflect justice? So improving prison systems requires a shift from punitive measures to the rehabilitative ones. This involves ensuring transparency, accountability, and humane treatment for all the prisoned individuals. Suggesting policy changes like improved mental health support, vocational training, and education within prisons can demonstrate practical approaches for reform. You can also mention prison reforms in progressive countries or cite organizations advocating for prisoners' rights, showcasing practical step towards justice-oriented prisons. Right? So, let us move on to the next topic. So the next topic here is, people without the knowledge of their past cultural history, origin and traditions is like a tree without its roots. So this idea emphasizes the importance of cultural awareness and heritage in shaping identity and societal cohesion. So the first question here is that what does it mean to lack knowledge of one's own cultural history? So lacking awareness of cultural history often means a disconnection from one's heritage, values, and a sense of identity is also disconnected. It can result in the loss of understanding about the struggles, achievements, and traditions that have shaped one's community or nation over so many years. Here you can also mention that some people might say that we don't know where we are going if we don't know where we come from. So this idea reflects that knowing our roots help us understand our present and future as well. Here, discussion on individuals who reconnect with their heritage often feel a stronger sense of identity and pride. For example, a community that revives its traditional art forms here can be used as an example. Global examples can also be used here, such as cultures that have lost aspects of their identity due to colonization or globalization and are now working on it to revive these practices. So the next question here is, how is cultural history similar to roots? So cultural history, like roots of a tree, provides stability and strength to individuals and communities. It also grounds people in a sense of continuity and tradition, which helps them understand and navigate changes and challenges in their lives. So here an analogy can be drawn as, just as a tree draws nourishment from its roots, people draw strength from their cultural history. You could use quotes here as well, such as the people without the knowledge of their past history, origin and culture is like the tree without roots. Here discussion of movements like the Harlem Renaissance in US, which emphasized reconnecting with the African heritage and identity, can be mentioned. The next question here is, why is understanding cultural history so important? So understanding cultural history fosters a sense of pride and belonging. It allows individuals to appreciate their unique heritage, which is essential for collective identity. It also helps societies make informed decisions for the future, learning from the past mistakes and successes. For example, history teaches us who we are and where we belong. This shows the intrinsic connection between history and identity. You can discuss how festivals, traditional ceremonies, and storytelling can keep cultural history alive. You can also explain how knowledge of history can guide social justice movement as people seek to correct historical injustices. Now the next question here is that what are the consequences of being disconnected from cultural roots? So disconnection from cultural roots can lead to a loss of identity and direction. It weakens the ties between generations, eroding social cohesion. A lack of cultural grounding can result in communities losing their sense of purpose and unity. So here, data about the decline of indigenous languages and its impact on cultural identity can be used. Discuss how communities that have experienced a cultural revival, like the Maori in New Zealand, show the positive effects of reconnecting with the roots. The last question here is, how can people reconnect with their cultural history and traditions? So reconnecting with the cultural roots can be achieved through education, storytelling, and community efforts. It involves promoting cultural practices, preserving historical sites, and encouraging intergenerational exchange of knowledge. Mention initiatives like UNESCO's World Heritage Sites that protect culturally significant locations. And students can also explore their own family or community traditions as a way of reconnecting with their cultural heritage. So let us move to the next topic now. So the next topic here is, philanthropy is commendable, but it must not be an excuse for society to overlook economic injustice. So this highlights the dual nature of philanthropy. While it can provide valuable support to the society, it should not distract from the root causes of inequality. So the first question in this regard would be, what is the role of philanthropy in a society? So philanthropy serves an important role by providing immediate support to communities in need and promoting welfare and developing initiatives. This includes everything from scholarship and food drives to large-scale health and education projects. So philanthropy is a way for the rich to give back to the society. However, it is essential to consider whether it addresses the root causes of societal issues or not. So here, we can highlight the work of organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in health, or by Indian CSR programs. Here you can also discuss how philanthropy can complement but not replace the responsibility of the state and society in ensuring justice. Right? So let us move to the next question, that is, why is philanthropy insufficient to address economic injustice? So it is insufficient because it often tackles symptoms rather than causes of inequality. For example, while scholarships help individual students, they don't address the systematic issues in education access. This can create dependency rather than fostering long-term change. Philanthropy is essentially like a band-aid solution. It can provide temporary relief but doesn't tackle structural inequalities. Here you can explain the sustainable change requires policy interventions such as better minimum wage laws or fair taxation, which help philanthropy alone cannot achieve. Mention how research showing that inequality persists despite significant philanthropic contribution, indicating a need for systematic change for dealing with injustice, economic injustice. Now the next question here is, how can philanthropy be used as an excuse to ignore economic justice? So when philanthropy is seen as a substitute for justice, it allows the wealthy to appear benevolent without addressing the economic structures that may contribute to the inequality. This can lead to a narrative where society feels less pressure to demand systematic reforms. So philanthropy should not be an escape from paying fair taxes, as it highlights the concern that some philanthropists use charity to deflect criticism while avoiding responsibility. You can discuss cases where corporations engage in philanthropy while engaging in practices that harm the environment or exploit workers. Here, debates can also be mentioned around billionaire philanthropy. Example, Warren Buffett or Mukesh Ambani, and whether it substitutes for paying higher taxes or ensuring worker rights. So the next question here is that what are the consequences of overlooking economic injustice? So ignoring economic injustice perpetuates poverty and social inequality, leading to social unrest and undermining sustainable development. Without addressing root causes, the cycle of dependency and inequality continues. You cannot solve poverty just by giving handouts. You need to change the system here. So this sentiment shows that how addressing economic justice requires deeper reforms. We can also discuss regions where significant wealth inequality has led to unrest, like the Occupy Wall Street movement, which demanded systematic changes rather than relying on just philanthropy. You can also share data on income inequality and how it correlates with social issues like crime and health disparities. So the last question here is, how can society balance philanthropy with addressing economic injustice? So balancing philanthropy with justice requires promoting policies that ensure fair wealth distribution, holding philanthropic efforts accountable, and supporting movements that tackle systematic issues. So philanthropy is good, but it is not a replacement for justice, because it reflects that philanthropy should be a supplement and not the substitute for systematic solutions. You can mention how policies like wealth taxes or fair minimum wages, which can reduce economic inequality at the structural level. Refer to the initiatives like Giving Pledge, where billionaires commit to giving away most of their wealth, as well as organizations that are transparent and inclusive in their philanthropic efforts. Right, now let us move to the next topic. So the next topic is social justice is achieved when charity becomes unnecessary because systems of poverty are dismantled. Now this idea presents the true social justice can only be realized when the root causes of poverty are addressed, making charity a temporary rather than permanent solution. So the first question that arises here is that what is the relationship between social justice and charity? So charity provides immediate relief to those in need, but it doesn't solve their underlying causes of poverty and inequality. Social justice, on the other hand, focuses on creating long-lasting changes by addressing the structural issues that perpetuate inequality. This highlights the contrast between short-term aid and systematic solutions. So you can mention charitable organizations like the food banks versus the policy-driven initiatives that tackle root issues such as minimum wage reforms. Philosophical perspectives can also be incorporated here, like thinkers like B.R. Ambedkar or Nelson Mandela, who emphasize systematic change over temporary aid. Now, moving on to the next question. Why is charity considered insufficient for social justice? So while charity provides essential support, it doesn't challenge the systems that keep people in poverty. In some cases, it can even create dependency rather than empowerment, making it a very temporary solution. So charity can help people survive, but social justice is something that will help people thrive. So this underscores the need for empowerment over mere survival. You could include relevant data or case studies also that show the limitations of charity, such as dependency statistics or data indicating recurring needs for the same communities. You can also discuss the critiques from authors like Peter Buffet, who argue that charity sometimes masks systematic problems rather than solving them. So the next question here is, how can systems of poverty be dismantled? So it can be dismantled by implementing fair economic policies, wealth redistribution, and it can also be done by ensuring access to quality education, healthcare, and employment opportunities for everybody. So here you can discuss initiatives like universal healthcare, accessible education, and minimum wage laws as foundational tools to tackle poverty. You can also give references of countries or states that have successfully reduced poverty through systematic reforms. Now the next question here is that why does a society look like when charity becomes unnecessary? So in a society where charity is no longer essential, there would be an equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. Communities would be empowered, they would be self-sufficient and capable for supporting their own growth without external aid. So here you can use quotes from leaders like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, who envisioned a just society. You can also highlight indicators such as low poverty rates, high literacy levels, and universal healthcare as signs of society that doesn't rely on charity. The last question that here arises is that how can societies transition from charity to sustainable development? So transitioning from sustainable development requires focusing on policies that promote social and economic inclusion, encouraging grassroots initiatives, and ensuring governance that is transparent and fair. There is a famous saying that teach a man to fish, don't just give him the fish. This principle reflects how empowerment over dependency is necessary. You can also highlight sustainable development goals by the United Nations that aim to eradicate poverty by fostering inclusive development. Mention grassroots movements or sustainable projects, example the self-help groups, microfinance groups that empower individuals and communities. So to wrap up today's discussion, highlights that the real social justice goes beyond charity and it's about addressing the roots of inequality. Charity can provide short-term relief, but lasting changes come from ensuring access to education, healthcare, and fair opportunities for all. As you reflect and think about how we can build a society where charity becomes unnecessary because everyone has the tool to thrive independently. Thank you for joining and see you in our next session.